Well, hello. My name is Melissa C. I am a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm from New York, and yeah. So I'm today. I want to talk about grieving, and and specifically grieving and the 12 steps. And my title is "Sadness is not a defect." you know um so I'm doing this talk really on the heels of having just lost my mom, which is definitely very painful. um and painful losses, I have to say, are not new for me, or really, I would say, for anybody. But what is novel for me is experiencing painful losses in recovery, in a recovered state. So I'm going to kind of contrast a little bit what it was like previous, having had losses without having a real recovery, without having a firm relationship with God, to fast forward to today with having experienced painful loss and having a concept of God that I could rely on. I want to say, first of all, I came back to OA a number of years ago. I've been recovered over 11 years, and but I've been in and out of recovery in the 12 steps in the rooms of Overeaters Anonymous for a bit. And, so I had done the in and out dance. And so when I came back to OA, about 11 and a half years ago, having experienced some very painful losses, and it made it difficult for me to find a concept of God, you know. And I want to tell you that, yeah, I had losses, but my losses did not cause my compulsive eating. I was well practiced in the act of binge eating, of using food, of relying on food and diets and control years before I experienced my own personal tragedies. And in fact, I would say, in a way, being a compulsive overeater, well, it might have almost saved me at that period, because I had no relationship with God. And and there was a time when the pain was just so unbearable that the numbing I would get from food was like, I almost want to say it was my necessity. Like, I just could not get relief. Um, and you know, what happened was the food stopped working. I couldn't get numb on the food anymore, and so in a state of like crushing pain, I returned to Overeaters Anonymous, and here was my quandary. Here was my problem. I believed that God had screwed me, that God cheated me and abandoned me. And because, I had pleaded for people to live, like there was losses that I was experiencing, sickness, and I really felt like the desire for those people to be okay was a pure and loving desire that came from my heart and was unselfish in nature and therefore worthy of God's intervention. Right. So I was thinking, okay, the worthiness of God's intervening. Well, if he doesn't intervene, then what? Right? If God didn't change it for me, then what? For me, it made it hard to find a connection with God. Hard, but I want to say not impossible, right? Because the pain of obesity and the fact that I couldn't seem to help myself drove me back into OA. Like, I was beaten into a state of reasonableness. That's what they say is the requirement. In the end of my disease, it was a blessing. It was a blessing and a miracle, because it presented me with a necessity for God. Like, I'm so grateful that my disease got that bad, because I knew I wasn't going to get this on my own. And it was really through that, through my addiction, through the pain of compulsive overeating, I actually found a way to forgive God, let God back into my heart. And they say God comes in through our wounds, right? The cracks are where the light shines through. And in there's a solution, page 25. This is going to explain exactly what's happened, right? It says the great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. So, on my own, I could not change my attitude toward life, towards my fellows, and towards God's universe. I just couldn't. I couldn't do that on my own. I can't change my attitude. You know, my attitude stunk. I mean, that's the truth. I had this arrogance in a way. I had an exaggerated sense of my own importance. And so I believed that bad things should never happen to me. Like, that was my belief that um, I had this fundamental and unshakable belief that if I had a different set of circumstances, that I would be happy. I really thought that my happiness was contingent upon circumstances. And I've actually found out throughout this particular season that my circumstances can be challenging and difficult and sad. I can even experience sadness and yet still have this happiness inside me. And it's because when I live in agreement with what I believe God's will is for me, I have a sense of inner satisfaction. You know, so what happened was I pushed away my God given emotional need to grieve. That was my truth back then. And grief is not a defect. It's not really meant to be whisked away. It actually needs to be experienced. It is a normal response to a great loss to have grief and sadness over it. You know, but the difference is I was living in self-pity. So what is the difference between sadness, between grief, sadness, and self-pity? Well, I think it's like this. Self-pity pushes others away. It closes the door on receiving comfort. And in self-pity, I have an excuse for behaving in ways that are outside my own standards. I start thinking that the world should give me a free pass for my crappy behavior. And self pity really grows in solitude and in this lie that I tell myself. And here's the lie that I would tell myself is people are expecting me to blank. Go to work. People are expecting me to go to work. People are expecting me to throw birthday parties. People are expecting me to socialize. People are expecting me to smile. People are expecting me to fake my way through life. I used to feel like I could I could say, people are expecting me to answer I'm fine. Like someone would say, hey, how you doing? And I would feel like, see, when they ask it to me that way, they my right answer, the only answer that people are expecting is fine, and therefore that's the only thing I can say. And so what would happen is I was like faking my way through life. I was really sad. And and then because I didn't let anyone in, because I put on this fake kind of facade, I was able to tell myself that others don't care. Nobody cares. And it zoned in on where others are failing me, you know. Um, well, how can other people show you that they care when you don't act like you care? When you don't act like you need others to show you care. I think people take their cues from what it is that you present to them. You know, I I really thought that others were failing me. Like that's what I zoned in on. I cursed the universe that took what I believed was mine. This was my crappy attitude. I one of the losses that I experienced, we had many late pregnancy losses, my husband and myself. And then we had a son that lived a day and died in between our two children. And I saw that particular child as my possession, that he belonged to me and he was taken away from me. And I walked around angry at people, mostly women, who were able to have healthy babies and increase their families. And they had what I knew was meant for me. I was jealous. I had a neighbor who had 5 daughters. I had my best friend, 4 kids, my sister, 5 kids. It was like everyone around me was getting what I wanted. And I would cringe. I'd be so jealous. I would cringe when I saw a baby. I would cringe when I saw a pregnant person. I hated myself for being this way. And yet I couldn't change my attitude. I had this deep rooted selfishness. I did not want others to get what I knew was rightfully mine. I actually saw the good things that others got as somehow evidence that there wasn't going to be enough for me. Like somehow, because she had a baby, the great universe that was providing babies, God that was providing babies, well, there was only a certain amount and I wasn't getting mine because this person got theirs. And, you know, I really didn't understand God's economy, because in God's economy, good things that others get are just evidence that good things are available. Good gets multiplied in God's economy, not divided. It's like it operates the same way love does. Where there's love, it grows more love. It's not like a pie that gets divvied up, and just because someone got some, then there's less for me. But jealousy tells me that there's only just so much to go around. And what happened was my jealousy turned me into someone I didn't like very much. So not only was I like sad about what I was losing, but I wasn't just sad about the loss that I was experiencing. I was sad because I was experiencing the loss of myself. I was losing who I was. Like, I've always loved babies. And how is it that I couldn't stand being near a baby? You know? And so I want to tell you this is nothing. That description is nothing like the way I've been experiencing my current difficulties. In fact, what has happened is that my mom's dementia and passing away has been an entirely different experience. I have, you know, what's happened for me through this particular experience is that I'm not dishonest. When somebody asks me how I'm feeling, how you doing, I can generally answer it honestly, and it's not coming to them what they need to heal me and fix me and cure me, but it's like, yeah, I'm really feeling sad right now, or this has been a hard season, you know, and yet, even in the midst of that, like I said, I've been experiencing a real sense of joy throughout this joy of living. Page 29, it says, each individual in their personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. And so that's really what this is about. How has this experience further helped me grow my relationship with God, establish and grow my relationship with God? You know, I believe, that we all get dealt our hand. That pain and loss is part of the human experience, and that um, I don't believe that God, you know, did this to me to teach me any particular lesson. Like that's not my belief, but I believe that this is part of the human experience, and God made me human, and do believe that God wants me to take my pain and transform it into something that is useful and therefore worthy and beautiful. And so, I think, I first of all, I've always been a compulsive eater. My earliest memories are of food. And like I said, I did not become a compulsive eater because of any loss or tragedy. But I do believe that somewhere I got this idea that pain and discomfort must be avoided, skipped over, ignored at all cost. Now, I also believe that it's human to avoid pain whenever possible, but I think like hunger is human, right? Like desire for things are human. My humanness for skipping over difficulties is accelerated, is exaggerated, is extreme, right? So I I think, it's a very unique thing when you're a compulsive eater because e- especially at a young age, what having my addiction be a food addiction, having food be the thing for me is it meant that I had access to a way of getting high and skipping hard feelings that was very easy. Like it was all around me. I had ample opportunity to avoid difficulties because food is everywhere. And, you know, but of course, we don't really get to skip anything. What we do get is the unfortunate ability to postpone the inevitable, right? The inevitable. So, what's different? What's different today? Well, I don't try to postpone the inevitable. I don't try to skip my pain. I cry when I feel the need to cry. I reach out for help. I tell others what I'm going through. And I do believe, I do what I believe God is directing me to do regardless, you know. Um, in step two, right? In step one, I recognized that I was powerless. I was powerless to my disease. I was powerless to eating compulsively. I'm also powerless to having a human experience. I'm powerless to experiencing pain and difficulties and trials. That's that I have no power over. Cannot skip that, right? So then in step two, for me, was where I hit my first huge stumbling block. And so I didn't know that I could come to believe in a power that could restore me to sanity. And how could I consider a God that would intervene with my food when he hadn't intervened with my other losses? How could that be? And so I think for me, the difficulty was is I thought that a power could could skip the losses. And that's not really what step two is about. Step two is about having a God that can get in between, that can give me relief, right? And so what happened was in the past when I came in, I had this icy intellectual mountain. They speak about it in the book. And because I really didn't understand the concept of my mind being broken. I could understand that concept. I understood that I could not rely on my thinking. I didn't like it, but I got it. And yet, here I was being asked to use my broken mind to create my own concept of God. And that seemed like a scam, like a hoax. Like, which is it? Is my mind broken? Is it not broken? Could I really make up God? Like, I thought that forming your own conception meant you get to make up God. And I was thinking, well, wait a second. You just told me my brain is broken, but now you want me to use my broken brain to make up God. Well, first of all, no. Forming your own conception does not mean you get to make up God, right? I'm not the creator of the creator. But what I can do is to form my own conception, my own beginning, to decide where I'm going to start. And here's what happened for me when I was having that mental kind of battle in my brain, right? Where I was like, well, this is stupid. I- what am I supposed to make up God with my broken thinking? Like, what is it, right? I heard this voice in my brain, and this is how incredibly creative, intelligent, and loving God is, because He uses voices that resonate with me. He uses what I can hear, and so what I heard was my dad's voice, this very firm but loving voice. My dad's gone, and I knew I wasn't like imagining it. It was just like in my brain, and what I heard in my dad's voice in my brain was, stop being so smart. You don't know it all. You want to get better or not. And, I've discovered I really can rely on a power that I can't understand. In the book, we get this reminder about electricity and how I really don't understand how generators work. You know, how there's something that happens in power plants with turbines and generators, and I don't know, there's wires that are out on the street, and somehow there's a fuse box in my basement, and like when I blow a fuse, I call out to my husband and he does something with it. I know I really don't understand how any of it works, but it does not keep me from turning on my light in this room, right? Why? Why is it that I don't need to understand it entirely in order to utilize it? Because without lights, I'm in the dark, right? I have a necessity for lights. Therefore, I don't really need to understand it. I just need to use it. And, um, you know, we don't have to understand God at this point. And in fact, I'm never promised that I'm going to understand God. What I am promised is that all I ever need is a willingness to believe. I have discovered that this incredible power does not have to make sense to me. It can morph, it can evolve, it can change, it can grow, it can contradict. I can accept this today, and I'm too small and too earthly to comprehend the power so great. So I have no problem believing that God can relieve me of the desire to eat compulsively, because He has, even in the midst of difficulties. So then what? Well, then we're at step three. This is the how and the why of it. We have to quit playing God. It doesn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Page 63, the first paragraph says this: when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we can contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. So I just love that. In step three, turn my will and my life, my thoughts and my actions over to this God that I still haven't figured out. And I want to tell you that throughout this last year or so, this was a difficult season. My mom slipped into dementia. Um, I would just keep asking God for my assignment. You know, it's like I think back, like, right at the end of pandemic, I went to visit my mother in Florida, and I thank God for my abstinence and my clarity. I was seeing indications that my mom was struggling, that she was having a a problem, you know? Um, it was one thing when you were talking on the phone, um, and it was another when I was in her home. And what I saw was my mother's home was not very clean, and my mother's always been very neat. My mom was eating on paper plates. She was reusing them. They were dirty. Just not like my mother. Things were out of place. And then never forget, I went onto her terrace where her plants, she has a lot of plants, and they were all dead. And it was frightening. It was upsetting and frightening. And so, I had to have hard conversations with my siblings. And then we had made this decision that we got to bring mom up. And then my mother lived with my sister, and that was all well for a while. And then it got to the point where my mother could not live there anymore. My mother needed to go into into a facility. And then from there, my mother needed to be hospitalized. And then we made the decision for hospice, and my mother subsequently passed on. Um, Throughout this whole thing, difficult assignment, but I sought to be obedient to God. And here's what I discovered: my happiness is not dependent on my circumstances. I know I said it before, but it's worth repeating. My happiness is dependent on living in accordance with my purpose. When I do what I believe God is asking me to do, then I can do difficult things. And I have this internal sense of joy and strength. Things that I would have found too difficult or not, I have the ability to be appropriately sad. I can do it and still be appropriately sad. Being sad is, like I said, is not a defect. Although sometimes the things that I believed were contributing to my sadness, I would have resentment towards. And thankfully, that is something we do have a way of handling. So when resentments would come up through this process, and they were generally, you know, um, resentments really towards other people who were walking along the path with me, whether they were siblings or other relatives. Those were the areas that thankfully we have a way of handling, you know, that because the business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found it's fatal. But when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of the alcohol returns, or in my case, the food, and we drink again, we eat again. And with us, to drink or to eat is to die. If we're to live, we have to be free of anger. Yes, even in this circumstance, I have to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. So I want to say, like, I've had some resentments along the way, and it's so important to have rigorous honesty, real time honesty, and an inventory practice, to not sweep things under the rug. I had, you know, I had a huge resentment come up, multiple, towards my brother in law, towards my brother, towards my sister throughout this period. Everybody's doing the best they can, right? But I would get worked up over things. And what would I do? Well, did the work. I did the inventory around it. Um, I put it down and I would do 10 steps. And I'm so grateful for friends who have walked this walk and who aren't afraid to tell me the truth. I think it's really crucial. Like there was one particular day where I was just seething in anger over a particular family member. And my friend said, like, I think you need to let's do a 10. and or you want to call me. And I called her and she walked me through it. And actually, before she walked me through it, I rattled off what I was pissed off about, and I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know I have to get rid of this. I just need a minute. I need a minute. I'm so angry. I just need a minute, or so upset, or this is a hard time." And she lovingly said, "Okay, but that's all you get. You don't have, it's the dubious luxury of normal men. We cannot afford a resentment." And I'm grateful for someone that would tell me the truth, right? Now, I never would have gotten that if I were living in the denial, if I were living in self pity where I wouldn't reveal it, I would just keep it to myself and then be bristly and sensitive. But here I was, and one of the most beautiful things that my friend reminded me of is the importance of prayer. Yes, I don't know why in the moment when I'm really angry at a person, I can't remember that. It's like I know it. I know it for you, but for me in the moment, I can't seem to remember it. And so I was reminded and I began praying for that individual. And I know it says to do it every day for 2 weeks. I want to tell you this prayer is truly miraculous. Prayer works because I think it lifted like almost immediate. It just lifts very quickly. So, I go to God. God really is my employer. And He hasn't given me any job that I'm incapable of doing. When I completely submit myself, here's the most beautiful thing of all: the thing that I am directed to do, the thing that I have to do, becomes the actual thing I love to do. My heart changes to match my circumstances. Um, and so did I have fear with my mom? Yeah, of course I did. And most of my fear was about the progression, right? Was about how bad it was gonna get, that it was gonna get worse. Um, and I just kept going to God with it. I just kept going to God with it and doing the next right thing. And for me, the next right thing was going to see my mom. Like I heard very clearly, spend time with her, spend time with her. And what happened was I wanted to. Like my husband, would say, or someone would say to me, like, you don't have to go today, or you don't have to go. And I'd say, I know, but I want to. I want to see my mom. On Sundays, I often wouldn't go. And come Monday, I couldn't wait for school to end because I was itchy to go see my mother, you know? And I found my assignment for her, for me and her, was to bring her an ice cream. Initially it was my mother was having difficulty eating. So I'd bring my mom a snack. And then I found that, or bring her foods that she likes. Originally, I was taking her out for pizza. We would go out and I would take her out so she can get her pizza, and I would bring my food with me. My mother stopped being able to eat. She stopped being able to chew pizza. And so my assignment changed. It was like, all right, bring her something soft, bring her a donut. Bring her a donut for a while. She wasn't able to eat that anymore. My mother wasn't swallowing her food. I heard, okay, your mother loves ice cream, bring her ice cream. I was bringing my mom an ice cream every single day, small chocolate ice cream, small chocolate soft scoop ice cream, which she loved. And it looked like nothing to me. I had zero interest and desire to think of feeding that to myself. It was for my mommy. And then my mother stopped really being able to eat that. So it was bring her a shake. Every time I would just go to God, God would give me the assignment. I spent time coloring with my mom. I spent time listening to some of her stories, recording her, just participating with her and the other residents, you know. And and as I did that, I fell in love with the assignment. You know, um, I'm not afraid anymore. And I know like it's easy to say because, it obviously it passed, right? Um, but even in the midst of it, I stopped being afraid because I realized that there was something happening inside my mother that I knew nothing about. And I had a belief, and I still do, that God and my mom were working on things together and that He gave me an assignment to do in the meantime. You know what that assignment was? That assignment was to love this new form of my mother. I had many forms of my mom. I had the mom of, uh, I was the youngest of a big family. I had the mom of like a big family mom, you know. Then when my siblings got married and went off to college, I had this kind of only child mom. And then my parents, as they aged, they got grandchildren and then great grandchildren. And I got to experience that aspect of my mom. I got to experience the mom who was widowed, when my dad died. And then in this season, I got to experience the toddler version of mom. Got to experience the mom that I got to mother. And I say got to mother because it really has been a privilege, you know. And so on page 84, it talks about a new freedom and a new happiness. Yeah, I got a new freedom and a new happiness even in this. Not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Actually don't regret any of this. No matter will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. I have felt serene and peaceful throughout. Um, I can see how my experience can benefit others. This experience is not unique to me. I think anything that God has given me through these steps, it does not belong to me. It comes through me, but is not to me. Um, the feeling of uselessness and self pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook toward life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us which we could never do for ourselves. So many things happened in the course of my mom's decline and then passing. And I found that I am able to handle situations that used to baffle me, that used to just, I would be so confused. And today, not so much. Now, I want to say that does not mean that I always get it right, right? I don't always know how to handle situations. Sometimes I make mistakes in steps 10, 11, and 12. I keep practicing what I've learned and I do my best to clean up my mistake as I go along. I've entered the world of the spirit, and my function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So I'm an imperfect child of God, and I make mistakes, but I love living in the spirit. And so I do whatever I'm directed to do so I can continue to live that. And, I have made mistakes along the way with my mom. One thing in particular was as my mom was really dying at the end. I wanted to be the stage director. I wanted to manage the lights, everything, the scenery, the players, right? And here's what it looked like for me. I even wanted to orchestrate the way my mother died. Like we were given some feedback about not having my mom, really eat. And she wasn't. My mother lost her appetite. She wasn't able to chew. And so eating was very dangerous and painful. Had the capacity to be painful. And I had a brother who, God, I love him, but he just couldn't accept it. And he thought we were starving our mom and he kept trying to feed her. And I would get worked up. And then I realized, you know what? God didn't assign me liaison. God did not assign me doctor. There's a doctor. There are family liaisons. They're in hospice. Let them talk to my particular brother. Stay out of it. The other thing is that I wanted to run the death show. Can you imagine? When it talks about the lights, the stage, right? All that, that was me. I actually wanted certain lighting. So when my sibling would come in, a particular one, he'd come in and put all the lights on and want to rouse my mom. I'd be like, stop, stop. Um, and even then I realized that's not the role I've been assigned. I can say what works for me, but I cannot make demands on anyone else coming to visit my mom. You know, I've learned now that I can go to God with my grief, and my Creator sits with me when I'm sad. I no longer have to run and hide from my human emotions. I can give them the right space, and I can take comfort from my loving Creator. The amazing thing is that I seek my comfort from God, my grief lessens. It finds its rightful place, and God has consistently placed people in my life who I can help. I've learned how to sit beside others when they're sad and how to allow others to sit beside me as well. With that, I'll pass.